So welcome everybody to the Soul Talk, broadcasting from Ascent in the holy city of Tzfat, Israel. And basically I'm going to share with you it's a fascinating talk that the Rebbe gave. I think he gave it on Shavuos, the last time the Rebbe spoke on Shavuos. And the concept is what's called Torah Chadosh Me'iti Teitzeh, a new Torah will come from me. Now, it's very interesting, actually. Christianity kind of hopped onto this pasuk and this verse, and they said, okay, that shows that there'll be a new Torah, a New Testament. But of course, the basic idea of Judaism, of truth itself, is HaTorah Hazu Lo Tehi Muchlefes. The Torah will not change, and it will always be consistent. So we can't say that there's a new Torah, but what we can say is that the Torah becomes renewed. And what that means is that there will be the deep secrets of the Torah that will be revealed, as well as the halachas, certain halachas, Jewish laws will be revealed. And the classic place that we learn this out from is actually the story, or the almost like the circus show that's going to happen when Moshiach comes, that there will be a little bit of a battle, a showdown between the Leviathan and the Shar Habar. Leviathan, of course, is a giant fish. I don't know the exact size, like a third of the size in the bottom of the ocean. Very super big. And the Shar Habar is a kind of a massive ox, like the size of a mountain. Both of them are somehow invisible, and they're going to come and they're going to have a battle, and the Leviathan is going to shecht, it's going to slaughter this big ox with its fin, and the Shar Habar, the ox, is going to gore the Leviathan, and therefore both of them will die, and God will take the fish and he will make it quite tasty, and he'll take the meat and he'll make it quite good. I'm sure he's got a nice grill going on. And together there will be a beautiful meal for the tzaddikim. We'll all live happily ever after. Well, of course, everything that's talked about is true, but it's also, more importantly, a metaphor for something else. So one of the questions that's asked is this a kosher shchita? Can you actually shecht in such a way? And the answer, of course, is given that this is not a human shchita. God is doing the shchita. God is orchestrating this shchita. Then the question is asked, but we know that it says, Torah lo b'shamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven. In other words, there are stories where the rabbis had different debates and arguments, and they would ask Hashem, and a voice would come from heaven. They would say, Hashem, I'm sorry, we love you, but Torah lo b'shamayim, the Torah is not in heaven, and therefore we cannot follow what you're telling us to do, because the Torah has certain rules and regulations. And this is a very important idea. You know, I learned with a Reform rabbi at Yale University. I started a Beis Medrash program, and I was quite interested, so I asked him to give me the books. What's the philosophy of Reform? I wanted to understand. So it turns out, maybe many people don't know this, but Reform is based on a very simple philosophy, and that is that any rabbi can say whatever he wants. That's the philosophy, which of course is no different to making an alternative medical school. And the philosophy is that any doctor can do whatever they want. You want to use chicken soup, you want to use carrot juice, whatever you want, you can do whatever you want. So of course this is not a philosophy, this is the opposition of a philosophy, which of course within human history many times there have been branches that branched out of Judaism, which were just temporarily successful, mainly because they were giving their adherence, some kind of an exit door or something easier to do. But eventually they fade away because, of course, they're not true. That's not a philosophy that any rabbi can say whatever he wants. It's not a rabbi. What is a rabbi? I happen to be a rabbi. What is a rabbi? It's the exact opposite. That you can't say what you want. That you are obligated to say what the Torah tells you to say. There's a rule and there's regulations, and that's what you got to follow. And so basically, what is a rabbi? A rabbi is a judge. And what does a judge do? He can't make up the law. He has to follow the law. And in fact, that's what lawyers do. They try to convince the judge what the law is. Each one tries to convince the judge, this is the law, this is the law. And he has to decide what is the actual law. Very often he will use precedents, former judges, etc., etc. Without going into too much detail, they have English law, Roman law, different ways of the structure of law. But ultimately, it does boil down to the same thing, which is that we are here to follow the law. We are not here to create the law. And that's really what your training is as a rabbi. You're trained on how to discover what the law says. So the law says that the Torah is kind of clear-cut. For example, it says in the Torah, don't break the Shabbos. So if it says in the Torah not to break the Shabbos, it means quite clearly. If anybody just joined, please put the phone on mute so there isn't any background noise so others can hear. Thank you so much. Mute is that little button. You'll see a little button next to your, at the bottom of the page, there's a little microphone button. So if you see that microphone and you hit that microphone button, your phone will go into mute. And then there won't be any background noise. Okay, fantastic. Awesome. Thank you. So the story is that hold on 1 second, please. The story is that we're just giving a little introduction for those that just came on. We're talking about what it says that when Moshiach comes, there'll be a new Torah, and that Christians actually kind of hopped onto this verse. But of course, it doesn't mean a new Torah, because we know one of the 13 principles of faith is that the Torah will never change. So what does it mean? It means deeper insights into the Torah. Now we know there are different levels of insights. There's an insight that kind of you just need to probe a little bit deeper and you discover it. So for example, if you're a scientist and you take some mud and you probe a little bit deeper, you see that the mud is made up of different factors. In fact, all living things, all organic matter is made up of 24 compounds. So you can look at it. But there are certain secrets that you can't even discover when you look at it. For example, we now know that matter is really energy. And you're not going to discover that in a microscope. It's not going to appear to you. So there are layers of secrets that take extraordinary revelation to reveal. Now, was the energy always in the mud? Yes, but you never saw it. And that's what Moshiach is going to do. He's going to reveal to us certain things that we never saw. So getting back to what we were talking about, we're saying that the Torah is, the job of the rabbi is basically to follow the Torah. And the Torah has never changed. And there have been many movements within the Jewish people, whether the Karoyim and the Tzedukim. In fact, Christianity was one of those movements that kind of veered off. And none of them survived, at least as a Jewish movement, because they didn't keep the authenticity of the original. And again, this is not to shame anyone, it's just to explain how Judaism works. And it's a very deep concept, because even Hashem himself can't come and create a new law, because he already gave the law. It's like, imagine a president of the United States coming, and he says, okay, I am now going to create the Constitution. We'll say, buddy, you were not elected to create the Constitution. You were elected to follow and implement the Constitution. You're not here. And in fact, you're not allowed to go against the Constitution. That's why there's a Supreme Court that is above you and that can say if you're doing the right thing or not. So the Torah has certain rules, certain parameters of how it works. And one of those rules, Torah azu lo tihi muchlefes, the Torah will not change. However, we do know that there are differences of opinions amongst rabbis. In fact, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel was like practically two Torahs. So how can this be? Is there change or isn't there change? What's going on? The answer is it depends. The best answer in life is it depends. A husband and wife once came to a rabbi. They said, Rabbi, we have an argument. So he says, okay, let me hear. He speaks to the husband. What's your argument? So he says his argument. He says, yeah, you're right. The wife says, hold on, let me say my argument. So she says her argument. He says, yeah, Taka, you're right. So she says, but how can we both be right? He says, yeah, you're also right. So in other words, sometimes we like to get into yes, we're yes people. Sometimes we like to get into we're fearful, protective, we're no people. Now, they're both wrong. Sometimes you have to say yes, and sometimes you have to say no. It depends. You can't just go around with a yes attitude or a no attitude. Now, the reason we do that is, first of all, it's very comfortable to say yes. It's very uncomfortable to say no. And furthermore, often we go into no because we're afraid and we realize we have to protect ourselves. We said yes too many times, we've been taken advantage of it too many times, we've been hurt too many times. We don't want to be hurt again. So now I'm a no person. Like King David himself said, Ani amarti b'chavzi, kol ha'adam koizev. I said in my haste, the whole world, they're a bunch of liars and crooks and cheaters. And I've been down that road, They say if you're not a liberal by the time you're 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative by the time you're 30, you have no head. That was exactly me. Because, if you have a heart, you just feel bad for people. But if you go through some life and you see the dark side, there are many people that want to take advantage. I lived in Africa for many years. And there's nothing an African can do that will surprise me. I've seen people who are going to be eaten. I don't want to say what the newspapers report there. The barbarism, the savagery, it's going on till today. A friend of mine was living in Ghana. The president that won the election, he ate his opponent's ear on public television. He's a cool guy. He ate his opponent. This is going on as we speak. So the point is that when we're thinking about truth, we have to have a real structure. It can't be based on human emotions, which are fluctuating. The human emotion is based on the human desire. And the basis of the human desire is three things. Number one, what's going to feel good. Number two, preventing what's going to feel bad. And number three, doing what's right. But often what will feel good or preventing what will feel bad is more important to me than doing what's right. In fact, you have to be some kind of a saint. They say about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they gave their lives they literally jumped into a fiery furnace not to deny God. But it says about these three great prophets, had they tortured them, they would have given up their faith. So everybody has a breaking point. A breaking point for the good. I shouldn't say for the good, a pleasure breaking point. People are very wonderful, smart people. They take drugs to the point of death. Other people, the pressure, I once asked a friend of mine, Yossi Ben Hashev, is a very clever guy. So we find in Eicha that if anybody just came on and they need to put their phone on mute, please do so because there's some background noise. So we find in Eicha a terrible story, the situation of the Jewish people by the siege of Jerusalem and a hunger, and Noshim Nachmonius Bishlu Yaldeim, compassionate women cooked their children. There was a case, two women came before the king, and what was the debate? Last night we had an agreement. It's too terrible to even speak about, but one of them reneged on the agreement. It came to such a point, and it's interesting because the pasuk, the Torah doesn't tell us achzoriyos, harsh, evil, cruel. Noshim rachmoniyos, compassionate people cook their children. How can a compassionate person do something like that? And the answer is, I asked my friend Yossi Ben Hashev, he told me it's called pressure. Sometimes in life we feel pressured. And because we feel pressured, our brains aren't functioning. We're not thinking well. There are stories, unfortunately, of people that, even strangled their children or whatever. And it just got too much for them. Their brain went into some kind of psychotic episode. And you can't even blame them because it wasn't them. Their intrinsic self is very beautiful. And this is one of the most fundamental ideas of Judaism and Jewish mysticism, that by nature we are kind and compassionate. And one of the things that the dark side wants is us to look at each other in a negative eye. Right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 Talmidim. He says, go figure out what is the best way for a person to live. And one of them said a good eye versus a bad eye. What is a good eye? That you don't look at a person and immediately think the worst. You look at a person and you immediately think the best. And if something goes wrong, there's a famous story in the Talmud that there was a person who worked for somebody for, I don't know how long it was, let's say many years, and it was time for him to go home. He goes to his boss, and his boss says, I'm really sorry, Yankele. I love you very much. I don't have any money. So he said, you don't have money? Pay me with cattle. This was a man that had a lot of cattle. He says, I'm sorry, I don't have any cattle. He says, you don't have cattle? So pay me with fields. He says, I'm sorry, I don't have any fields. She said, okay, fine. If you don't have any money, you don't have any cattle, you don't have any fields. Okay, I love you very much too. And he left. Imagine working for somebody for years. You build up all that money just to go home. Famous story with the Bnei Yisachar is actually an ancestor of mine. His father went away. Sometimes in the olden days, a person would be a malamed. He went to be a teacher somewhere. He was teaching this guy's kids for, 6 months. From Sukkot to Shavuos. Sukkot to Pesach. It's time to go home. Now, in between, what happened was, there was a snowstorm. And this guy had an inn. And there was a couple of non-Jews. They needed to stay over. He says, do you have any money? So they said no. So the teacher said, listen, you got to take them in. They're going to freeze to death. So he said, listen, I'm not taking people in without money. So he says, okay, I'll pay from my salary. He says, okay. So he stayed for 3 days. 3 days and 3 nights. And they had food. And the snowstorm subsided. And they left. Turns out that as he's ready to leave, so his boss says to him, listen, the bill that they racked up was 43 ruble, and I owe you 40 ruble, so really now you owe me 33 ruble. So I'm going to make a deal. You go home, don't worry about the money, and then when you come back, you'll pay off the 3 ruble. And you can imagine how he felt. He has to come to his wife, working 6 months, and show her nothing. So he comes to the city. He didn't know what to do. He went to the Beis Medrash to learn some Torah. In the meantime, his son hears that his father's in town, so he runs to tell his father. His father sees him, and now he's doubly embarrassed because the son shows him, oh, look, I got a new suit that my mother bought. They would buy everything based on what we call, it was like in the olden days with the stores, they would write it down. You could pay later. And so she had meanwhile bought Pesach and everything based on the assumption that he's coming home with money. Now he was really him. Hello?
It's probably in the same place. Oh, sorry. It's probably in the same place.
If anyone needs to put the phone on mute, that way we won't hear background noise. It's a little button by on the bottom. It has a microphone. So in any event, so right now he has to walking home with his son. And suddenly a carriage comes barreling down the road. And off the carriage fell a little bundle of money. So they pick it up to right away return it. But the carriage runs away. And they open it up. And now this is called hefker. It's ownerless money. And money that doesn't have a sign. It's ownerless. And it happened to be 43 ruble. So the little Bnei Yisachar, when he opened the door for Eliyahu Hanavi, he says to his father, Daddy, it's the coachman. So it's Eliyahu Hanavi. So Eliyahu Hanavi, who did such miracles, does such miracles, should come back and bring Moshiach already, right? Eliyahu Mavasar Agula says every day he goes to Tveria and he announces the redemption. So, getting back to the original story, we're talking about the ethics of Hashem and how he could be involved in the Torah. And we said that Hashem is not allowed to change the law. Even a Baskel, even Hashem is not allowed to come and change the law. However, we find that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, they had an argument for 3 years about the laws. And then they heard a voice. And the voice said, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. These and these, the words of Beis Hillel and the words of Beis Shammai, they are both the words of the living God. In fact, it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to heaven, Moshe is called Mem Shin He, Moshe, Shammai, and Hillel. And he saw Hashem studying, maybe it was Shammai or Hillel or Abai and Rava, because there's really the representation of their soul. Hillel were more compassionate, Shammai were more strict, and therefore their halacha is veered off in terms of how their souls were kind of hardwired. So to make a long story short, so why did they have this baskel and how can God intervene? And the answer is because it depends. God was not telling them something they didn't know. They knew the halacha was like Hillel because Hillel was a majority. But Hillel was worried because Shammai and the school of Shammai were kind of a little bit more sharp. And so therefore, and then when Moshiach comes, actually we're going to go to the way of Shammai because it will be a new Beis Din, be a collection of all the Sanhedrin of all the best, and Moshiach will be the Av Beis Din. He'll be the most wisest and most accepted in all of Jewish history. So they have an ability to change certain laws which are given within a context where there is a question the Beis Din has to decide. And so in conclusion, Hashem wasn't saying a new halacha, he was simply saying the halacha that they already knew. He was giving them a bolstering. And the same thing is with the halacha of the Shar Habar and the shechting of the Leviyasan. The Leviyasan shechting the Shar Habar. It's not a new halacha. The Torah never spoke about a halacha when God shechts. It was speaking about when human beings shecht. And in conclusion, the Rebbe teaches us something very profound. What is the shechting of the Shar Habar by the Leviyasan? Leviyasan represents the fish that's swimming in Alma Discassia. That's the world that's concealed, the hidden world. This is our inner world, and that's why its serrated fin is the concept. It goes like up and down, that we're always going up and down, we're always growing. And then what does it do? It shechs the Shar Habar, that big ox, because that represents our physicality. And even our physicality can be elevated to Hashem. And that's the concept behind it. Does anybody have any questions? Please feel free at this moment to ask any of your questions. Wow, I must have been clear. No questions. Okay, so that's the story. And we wish you all a beautiful day and many, many blessings and success.